the more you do this work, the more you get addicted to it. You want to have more impact and you see the potential for doing more, not only you as an individual, but to get others to do the work as well. And I think one of the things that I'm really proud of is working with government to help them invest in places that has that impact at large scale, and then also working with high net worth individuals to help them strategize in how they can invest their resources to make even larger impact. Hello and welcome to Flavors of Ambition. I'm Ramia Farrage, and I'm so pleased to be joined by two esteemed guests today for an absorbing conversation. I'm delighted to be joined by an influential voice and leader in education, in international development, and philanthropy, Maysa Jalbout. Welcome, Mesa. Thank you. And we also have the pleasure of welcoming BCG Senior Partner, Dr. Leila Hoteit, a specialist in human capital topics and the global lead of BCG's education, employment, and welfare sector. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mesa, I'd love to start by asking you about your personal journey that led to philanthropy. Would you share it with us? We'd really like to know your experience that shaped your vision for giving in the Middle East. Well, it's a long story, and like most of us, probably stems from my childhood, my formative years. I'm a Palestinian refugee, third generation, born in Lebanon. Um, and my upbringing was very much impacted by war, conflict, and instability. But in many ways, I was extremely fortunate as an individual because my family managed to protect me and to make sure that um, I had access to education, I had access to health, I had access to opportunities, exposure to the world, and for the most part, be in a safe haven. So when I look back as to what influenced me the most and what directed my sort of desire to have impact, it's the fact that I think back to many other children who were growing up in Lebanon, many other Palestinian refugees, many children around the world who grew up in similar contexts but didn't have that opportunity, didn't have that protection, didn't have the resources and the means to fulfill their potential. So for me, that's really what drives me. I feel like with every life I'm able to impact through my work, I'm paying it forward. And I think that you were, in terms of refugees, very fortunate to have that support, that education, that healthcare, and that familiar support that so many refugees today, the vast majority, don't have. And tell us about a particular moment. Can you recall one that really inspired you to dedicate your entire career to social impact and that solidified your commitment? So, when we first went to Canada as refugees, I was 16 years old and, very much uh, someone who was looking at it as an opportunity to kind of restart my life. And that's how my family positioned it because they really didn't want to leave the region, but they felt that this was the only way for us to sort of secure our future and to have access to quality education and to have an opportunity to build a new life. And so for me, having arrived in Canada at that young age, a critical moment was that I received quite a bit of help, from local organizations, from my school. I remember the teacher that worked with me to make sure that my essay was good for applying to university. I remember, being able to um, have access to a job that, really kind of made me aware of my surrounding and started to develop my skills. And think, when I thought about that, I thought, wow, all of this is already in the system and ready to help somebody, settle in and really reach their potential. And I never forgot that.
And actually, for the first part of my career, I started working in Canada on those issues, on local issues. How do you help people who are coming into the country? How do you help people who are falling through the cracks? So that's kind of an early moment. But I think the more you do this work, the more you get um, addicted to it. You want to have more impact, and you see the potential for doing more. And not only um, you as an individual, but to get others to do the work as well. And I think one of the things that I'm really proud of is working with government to help them invest in places that has that impact at large scale, and then also working with high net worth individuals to help them strategize in how they can invest their resources to make even larger impact.
And your work is so rewarding and it is benefiting so many people, not just in this region, but around the world. And I know that you have worked and studied internationally. How has this global perspective really influenced the way that you work today?
I think I've been so fortunate in some senses, having not been able to stay in the region forced me to adapt to many different contexts and to also see the world as, uh, in many ways, um, my playground. And so I've really been very fortunate in being able to work in so many different places. I've worked in Rwanda and Afghanistan, in Bosnia after the war, in parts of Africa and Latin America, and finally, not until 2007 that I started working in my home region in the Middle East. The impact that it's had on me is very simple. Um, People are people. They all want the same thing. They want safety, security, opportunity. They want to be able to fulfill their potential. And so, whether I have met um, refugee women from Afghanistan or, women from Latin America who are on the move to support their families, or from here, our region, they all want the same thing. And one of the first things that they tell me when I do meet them is that they have moved because they want opportunities for their own children. They want to secure access to education. They want to make sure that they have equal rights. And I think that's the lesson I carry with me, and that's why, I feel like I can work anywhere. But for now, I choose to work here.
Well, these are universal aspirations. And Leila, I want to bring you into the conversation. As you know, hospitality is a celebrated character of business in this region. It's a key ingredient for success. What do you think is most important about hospitality in terms of bringing about real change?
So, hospitality, as you said, is in the cultural fabric of the region. But hospitality is about more than social courtesy, and it's about enabling trust. When you are hospitable, people feel seen, people feel heard. And so, when you're thinking about philanthropy, about giving, when you're establishing genuine, authentic relationships with your donors, with the community, with the stakeholders, is when you're able to really do effective results to do lasting impact.
I like the way you link those two aspects. And Mesa, tell us, do you feel hospitality is key to success in this region?
100%. It really shapes the way we work and our outlook. And, it's a very well known fact that trust is essential to doing business.
And speaking of hospitality, can I ask you to share your favorite dish? I mean, this podcast is Flavors of Ambition. We need to incorporate food. What is your favorite dish? Does it evoke any special memories for you? Mesa.
I think one of my favorite dishes is one that my grandmother, my teta, used to make when we would stay at her house. Especially on the weekends, we'd wake up to the smell of bread. There'd be, dough laid out everywhere. And she would be getting ready to bake what we call manaish in Arabic. And my favorite menushi is with za'atar. And za'atar actually is like my comfort food. You're gonna laugh, but I carry it with me everywhere, especially when I'm on long trips, because I feel it just sort of instantly connects me to home. And just it gives me that sense of grounding, and it's tons of olive oil on it, and that comes from the region. And yeah, that's really when I want comfort, that's what I reach up for.
And for those who don't know, za'atar is thyme. So thyme is delicious and manaish is delicious. Leila.
So I love za'atar as well, and I love manouche za'atar, and it evokes my childhood as well. But I will say tabouleh. So that's a core part of Lebanese cuisine. For those who don't know, it's a salad with herbs and with vegetables. It was the only way that I could get greens into my diet when I was young, and I love it. And it reminds me, it invokes for me. I mean, it's part of the meze. Meze are these starters that you share as part of Lebanese cuisine, and so it's the joy of sharing a meal as part of my childhood and growing up, and that's what it evokes, and that's why I like it.
And how did you two meet? Was it a business meeting? Was it a social encounter? When did it happen and how did it happen?
So I'll take that one, and then please add the. So basically, we were doing at BCG, we were doing a social impact project with the El Ghourer Foundation, helping establish it, and the founder had received the CV of Mesa and wanted her as CEO. So my role was to meet her and to convince her and to tell her about the great things that that we were doing at the foundation and to convince her. So and the client was in Dubai, but she says, "Can we meet in Abu Dhabi because I live in Abu Dhabi?" I said, "I live in Abu Dhabi too. That's great." And then she tells me, "Can we meet in this coffee shop in this compound?" And I say, "That's my compound as well." So we actually were living 2 minutes walk from each other and had not met because
So it was
busy
fate.
women. So it was fate. Mesa, I want to talk to you about philanthropy. What role do you think it has in the world today and in shaping our future?
I think, Leila, philanthropy is something that has always been part of our society. Um, the best philanthropy that I know of is when women in a community reach out to other women to help them. It's when, a doctor volunteers in a war zone. It's when a teacher starts a school because there isn't one. So it's very much embedded in society. And it's essentially why I think philanthropy needs to invest in grassroots efforts, in grassroots initiatives, because they are the ones that have always been effective and the ones that will um, always be there long after sort of trends come and go. And for us here in the region, of course, philanthropy is embedded in our nature. It's part of our culture. It's part of our religions. And it very much guides the way our society works. Um, and so I think it's really, really crucial for us to not lose that as philanthropy becomes more of a global phenomena, and as it becomes studied, and we talk about strategic philanthropy, we can't lose what is at its core, what is at its essence. And it's very much about the idea that um, philanthropic organizations sometimes come to the table thinking that they can solve the problem themselves, or think that they can bring in a new solution, or that perhaps an issue um, hasn't benefited from certain resources or certain skill set. But oftentimes, what they find is that the solution is with the community. So I just really wanted to start with that. But the reason it's important is because it often fills a gap that's not being filled or addressed by government,
Mhm.
or effectively by the institutions that are in charge. That's what philanthropy is at its core. It's really addressing those issues that fall through the cracks.
What trends are we seeing in philanthropy globally right now?
Well, we're seeing the kind of philanthropy, the one that gets most attention, I should say, is philanthropy that's done by very large donors, where they can act in a way with a lot of visibility, and they can invest a lot of money. And coming from a region where most philanthropists choose to be confidential, because of the way we're taught that giving should not be promoted. We have a saying that says, your left hand must not know what your right hand um, is giving. Um, we have almost a bit of a clash in cultures in philanthropy, is that we're very much encouraged on a global level to seek attention, to seek media, to seek recognition, to be transparent. Um, and transparency in itself, of course, and accountability are very, very important. But it's also very, very important to be quite humble when it comes to philanthropy, because oftentimes philanthropic investments don't necessarily yield the results that they're intending to do. So I think, it's important um, to be transparent, but it's also important to, uh, respect the fact that, you need to be humble and you need to respect some traditions, such as the ones that we hold here. Another really important trend that I think is a positive one that we need to see more of is that philanthropists are starting to work together a lot more. And I think that's one of the most exciting ways that we can start to see greater impact is when philanthropic entities actually choose to collaborate because they realize that one philanthropic entity can't address a large issue on its own, but also that there's learning and support that can come from working with another organization. So we're starting to see big funds come to fruition. We're starting to see large campaigns, to eliminate disease where multiple funders come together. And hopefully, this is a trend that continues.
What unique aspects do UAE philanthropists bring to the table in this regard? And are they starting to lean towards this international trend of displaying their philanthropy?
Well, I think in the UAE, we're starting to see a lot more philanthropists more comfortable with speaking out about the type of initiatives that they are interested in, the types of initiatives that they are supporting. And also, that comes with more awareness that a lot of the philanthropic approaches that have been carried on from generation to generation, the quiet philanthropic work of supporting a family or an individual, feeding a family, funding the education of a child, all of that is still very important, but there is a responsibility um, and an opportunity for those who can commit more resources to do it in a much more institutional way. And so we are starting to see more philanthropists step up and institutionalize their philanthropy and work alongside government and international organizations. So, not on their own. And I think this is incredibly exciting, very welcome, and hopefully we'll see more of that.
I love what you said, Mesa. So let me ask you this. It's super important in philanthropy to be able to measure the impact of of the initiatives that you're delivering, because that's how you get even more giving. How do you think about that in the programs that you lead? What are the key metrics that you think are really important?
Well, I think one of the most important principles of philanthropy is that you should only fund what you can measure.
Mm.
Um, you can really only have impact on what you can measure. But I think that that often can be misleading in that people think that if I don't see the impact immediately, if it is not visible to me, then it's wasted or, it scares people. So obviously, all philanthropic dollars ultimately should have an impact on people or planet. And whether that's an immediate impact, like helping in a humanitarian context, or solving for planetary issues, climate change, and to ensure this, the ability of people to live in good health and to be able to sustain their livelihoods, then ultimately that impact is going to come back to people. And I think, uh, if philanthropic entities can um, have more of a balance between the immediate and the longer term, the resilience, then we are going to see much larger impact and much greater satisfaction in philanthropy. So that's in a very simplified way how I look at it, but it is complex. It's one of the most complex areas. But one of the simplest things philanthropists can do is to actually ensure that they have a budget for monitoring and evaluation, and to do that very early on when they initiate their philanthropic activity.
I want to go back to what you said around balancing short-term relief and long-term building resilience. The region is home to a number of humanitarian cities. How do you see that playing a role in that balance?
Yeah, I mean, it's perhaps one of the biggest challenges that philanthropists in the region face is how do they balance the consistently, you know, large humanitarian crises and the needs um, that we're seeing today, with that need to sort of address issues at the root cause for the long term. It causes a big dilemma, and particularly because there are so few philanthropists, like we were talking about before, who are operating institutional philanthropy and that are kind of visible. And so organizations that are raising funds would tend to go to the same entities over and over. So they get really overwhelmed and bogged down and are often berated publicly if they're not giving in a public way to, a humanitarian cause or whatnot. And so I think it does require courage,
Mhm.
like everything else. Um, I think one of the things that I find a bit discouraging, but it's starting to change, is when I hear philanthropists say that they don't want to invest any dollars in operational expenses of nonprofit entities because they want every dollar that they're investing to go to the community or the person that they're helping. And I agree that in theory that sounds good, but actually what that does is erode the resilience of the organizations that are operating to serve those people philanthropists are trying to reach. They need to be able to pay salaries to people who are delivering. They need to be able to sustain themselves when a crisis hits. Like, for example, when COVID hit, we saw a lot of organizations break up because they didn't have money to sustain themselves beyond the immediate crises. And so I think thoughtful, visionary philanthropists invest in resilience because they know that's at the core of what's needed.
Maysa, we've been working together on something that is very close to your heart, but also to BCG's heart as well, which is a program to support early childhood development in Gaza. Can you tell us a little bit more about the program and what's coming next?
Well, first of all, I should say that I'm incredibly grateful to BCG, to you, and to the entire leadership here in the region for really stepping up at a time where it mattered a lot. Um, I've been very fortunate to work with an organization called Their World, which is a children's charity that often chooses to work in times and spaces where children are not getting enough attention. And they are very focused on the early years. In fact, they have a campaign called Act for Early Years. And they chose to work with me and with BCG on profiling children 0 to 5 in Gaza. Why? The reason being is that in most humanitarian contexts, Gaza no exception, children at that age are often overlooked. There is no specific entity on a global basis that is in charge of this portfolio. It is often seen as sort of secondary to addressing larger family issues or community issues. But we know that the needs of children 0 to 5 especially in humanitarian contexts, are acute. We know that investments in children at that age are critical to their well being and to their long term mental and physical health. And increasingly, we also know that investments in age 0 to 5 is crucial to long term economic success. And this is not to mention anything of social, political, and global citizenship. So it was the right thing to do. So over the last few months of 2024, we put a lot of resources into ensuring that we understand what's happening with children of that age in a very difficult context. Spoke to many organizations, both inside Gaza and in the region, that are already working with children and have been supporting them through the humanitarian crisis and even before the crisis. And what we found was the situation is quite dire. It is at a scale that we've rarely ever seen before. As you well know, just some statistics for our listeners. There are over 20,000 children who have been orphaned in Gaza. There are at least 2,000 children that have lost a limb, if not more. There are over 50,000 children who are suffering still today from acute malnutrition. 85% of families in Gaza say that their children have experienced at least one day where they had no food at all. And of course, we know that every child in Gaza, and they form a large portion of the population, they're about half of the population, half of the 2 million, and 25% are actually under the age of 5, including pregnant and lactating mothers. So, needless to say, the need is massive and dire, and it's critical for the international community to step up to ensure that these children have the opportunity to recover from the severe trauma that they've been facing and to start building a brighter future.
Thank you so much, Maysa. I'm sure it's touched all of us. So here's to hoping and to a high impact program.
I want to talk about your past. You were once a refugee, as you mentioned earlier. How do you feel that that experience influenced your approach to philanthropy and to education advocacy?
Uh, Well, I think very simply, being a refugee made me a big believer, both personally and through my work, in the importance of education for refugees. So for me, it was always both. Um, but both areas, whether it's investments in education or in supporting refugees, they're both underfunded globally. So I'll give you an example. Um, in humanitarian context, less than 3% of investments go to education. So when you have a refugee crisis, um, very little of that money actually goes to support the continuation of education for people who have been displaced. So imagine there's nothing that they need more than education, but yet it is the smallest investment.
Why is that?
I think largely because there has been not as much awareness, but also because when um, media focuses on what's happening, they often promote, human suffering, which is of course natural. So people tend to want to provide food, healthcare, shelter. Those are seen as the most immediate and urgent needs. But when you speak to refugees themselves, and especially refugee families and mothers, they'll tell you, and I've had this conversation with many refugees, that I will prioritize the education of my child over food in my own mouth.
Well,
This is for them the only way out of the situation that they're in. And the only way that their child will have hope for the future is if they're able to go to school. So, very naturally for me, this has become my focus. And I'm really pleased to say that we're starting to see much greater support for both refugees and for education. But we still have a long way to go.
Mesa, thank you so much for sharing with us all of your insights on philanthropy, and we would love to hear more about philanthropy. We do need to move on to our conversation about education. And Leila, I would like for you to start this conversation, if you would. As you know, the Middle East is witnessing significant investments in edtech, particularly from GCC countries. How can we ensure that these technologies benefit the underserved communities who perhaps need them most?
So, so EdTech can serve both as a support mechanism to ensure access and to underprivileged population of education, but also can be a significant barrier. So when we think about COVID, for example, COVID times, we saw populations around the world, including in the US and other and all around the world, really suffering because they didn't have access to devices. The children didn't have access to devices. There was no access to broadband internet at home. And so when you think about edtech, you need to make sure that the governments, the philanthropies are actually coming together to subsidize for vulnerable population and underserved population devices to ensure that they have access to internet. You also want to ensure that there are NGOs on the ground that are helping deliver edtech in the most effective way to those underserved population. What's also important, as Maysa was mentioning, is important in education, as in everywhere else in philanthropy, is to be able to have monitoring and evaluation frameworks and ensure that edtech is really the specific technology that you're using is actually achieving the impact that you're looking for, and you keep evolving. And then, of course, teacher training is incredibly important. How do you ensure that the teachers are trained on all the edtech that you are integrating into education?
So many elements to ensuring accessibility.
Yes. And so many failures in the past around edtech in the last 20 years are because one of these elements was missing, and then everything falls apart. So, Maysa, you've championed the importance of education in philanthropy. Which areas of education do you think are critical for philanthropy, and where do you see the long-term benefits?
I think there are multiple opportunities for the philanthropic sector to have an impact on the education sector. And, with the opportunities that we're starting to see, for example, in technology, there are multiple opportunities to make sure, for example, that the new innovations in technology are accessible to people who need them. So if I'm looking at the really exciting work that's happening around tutoring, for example, if you think about AI and technology specifically for education, one of the most promising areas currently is tutoring and the ability to individualize that learning to a child's learning preferences, and increasingly, hopefully, also for children who have different abilities. Um, Tutoring in education is one of the greatest investments that families make in developing countries in education. So actually, it's a massive inhibitor for the success and continuation of children in school. So if you think of like countries like Egypt or India, families save money to invest in their child's tutoring to ensure that that child is able to continue their education, to the tune of billions of dollars every year. So the potential return on finding solutions that cater to the needs of those children would have a massive economic impact on those families and also hopefully contribute to greater education results for those children in those countries. Um, I think it's really interesting and exciting to follow these developments, to be part of the development process, not also to just wait for that technology to come from elsewhere,
Mhm.
but to be participating in it so that it can be catered to, and take into account the needs of the children around the world. Um, cultural language. Language is extremely important. Most of this work is being done in English, and so for children who do not speak English, and um, for the importance of learning in mother tongue, it's really important to ensure that the language of tutoring is also accessible to children around the world. Another very important area. So this is kind of an emerging area, and that's why I highlight it first. There's an ongoing, consistent challenge in ensuring that children have access to education in emergency contexts. And unfortunately, emergencies are continuing to grow, and not just due to conflict, but increasingly due to climate change, as more and more people have to flee their communities due to um, fires, due to uh, you know, uh, environments becoming less hospitable to farming, etc. More and more families are having to move away, and children do not have access to education. And therefore, it's going to require the philanthropic community to come together to make investments in access to not just mobile education, but ways that encourage systems to integrate children in much more systemic ways. And then part of that, for example, as we've seen here in the region, to enable young people to continue their education wherever they may be. And that means creating flexible systems that recognize, we call it, education passport. So it means that one day you're in one country and second you're in another country, and you can't enter the system because it doesn't recognize the education that you received before. And so innovative tools are being developed to assess prior learning. We need to invest in that, and we need to invest in ensuring that our systems recognize that. And then I would say, last but not least, is that quality is extremely important and relevance is extremely important. And so we sit in a region that has done quite well in access to education, but we're still not seeing the results that we need in terms of quality. And so we need to work alongside governments, ensure that our children have better access to quality education.
And Mesa, what are your thoughts on climate education? The Middle East is witnessing the same impacts from climate change as the rest of the world. And how can schools really prepare students to address and to adapt to the environmental issues that we are seeing now?
That's a really great question. I think climate change is so important to young people everywhere around the world, especially children. They are coming into a world that is very worrisome, in terms of climate change. And they feel that it's their responsibility to ensure that, um, that they are not contributing to environmental degradation, that they are not contributing to climate change. Um, and they point the finger at our generation, but hasn't done enough for protecting the environment, right? As to prepare them to prepare the world that they're going to inherit. And so it's a bit, it is incumbent on us, therefore, to ensure that our education systems, both in the school and at home, at the community level, uh, are able to respond to that desire. And that means integrating it into the education system very naturally and providing opportunities for young people to be part of the solution, part of the change. I think we really underestimate kids. They really, really are creative about this. They're thinking about this all the time. They know how to use technology much more effectively than we do. There often are, ethical barometer when it comes to climate change. We're using too much water. We shouldn't be driving so much. Tracking our carbon footprint, replanting trees. These are all things that they take for granted and are very natural to them, and they should be an extension of their education.
And it's actually inherent in young people's culture now, isn't it? Taking care of the environment and having respect for the environment. Leila, what would you say that schools can do to really prepare students in this regard?
Yeah. So maybe I'll build on what Maisa was saying. So we see countries around the world today integrating climate change and climate education into the national curricula. The UAE took a lead on this during COP28. At the school institutional level, what they need to do in the Middle East to prepare the students to adapt and be ready for climate challenges is, number one, embed environmental education into their school curricula, both so examples like water conservation, renewable energy, climate adaptation and resilience. And that comes both in the STEM curricula and the social studies, how to promote this in terms of your moral education as well. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of practical initiatives to get students engaged in terms of school recycling programs within the community on green building designs, renewable energy programs, just to cultivate the environmental responsibility. Schools need to also make sure that as they do all of this, they are collaborating with international organizations, with NGOs to make this all the more powerful in terms of program. And of course, as mentioned before, when it comes to edtech, teacher training. If you don't get the teachers on board on this, you're not going to succeed. And then finally, I want to repeat something very important that Maysa has said, which is grassroots innovation. Very often, the solution is within the student. And so how do you tap into this to make this a big success?
What's really positive is that this is really already a part of young people's values and norms, so it can only improve.
Mesa, you and I are passionate about so many topics in common, education being one, but also young girls and women empowerment. In terms of gender disparities, how do you think philanthropy can help in a more targeted way when it comes to girls getting an education, young women having access to jobs, and also to leadership positions?
Leila, you've done so much on this, so I feel like I should also ask you the question in return. But for me, I think one of the most exciting and potentially the real breakthrough in philanthropy, specifically focused on gender equality, is that we're starting to see a lot more women lead in philanthropy. So, women philanthropists, as well as women leading investments in philanthropy. And the reason I'm excited about that is not because that, you know, they are women themselves, but because they're bringing a new approach to the way that philanthropic dollars are being invested in. Uh, we're starting to see, sort of bucking the trend a little bit in the sense that, if you think of the likes of Mackenzie Scott, who is sort of saying, nope, I'm not going to do philanthropy in the traditional way. I'm going to invest in organizations that are at the community. They're the ones that know what they're doing. And I'm going to give them money and no questions asked. Revolutionary. For those of us who've been working in this space, we've been saying this for a very long time. Of course, she's doing her due diligence with organizations that she's working with. But the bottom line is she's trusting that those organizations that have been there for decades are the ones that are going to be there long after her dollars dry out. And I think that it took a female philanthropist to come into the space to make that kind of change. And I think other organizations are starting to follow suit. So she's having a knock on impact as well. The other side of it is that they're prioritizing investments in gender. So, you think about some of the younger generation philanthropists, many of whom are women, are also making sure that their organizations are not just investing equally in women and girls, but they are saying, where are the gaps? How are we going to change the system? What are the issues that are at the crux of why women are not moving forward? And I think those are the kinds of hearts conversations that we need to be having in order to move the dial. It's exponential change is not going to happen if we continue doing things the way we're doing it. Of course, a lot of credit should be given to philanthropic entities that are addressing issues that are impacting women either more or equally to men, for example, in the health sector. But the reality is, when it comes to poverty, when it comes to diseases, when it comes to violence, women and girls are still largely more impacted around the world. And so more philanthropic dollars need to follow. When it comes to education and girls, we are sitting in a region where we've seen a lot of advancements in girls' access to education. In fact, I often like to point to my Western colleagues to say we have more women in university than men,
And more women graduating with higher marks.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, correct. This isn't to say that we don't have a lot of work to do. And certainly one of the areas where we still have a long way to go is in ensuring that women who do graduate from university enter the marketplace and stay in it. And this is where governments and businesses need to do a lot more to encourage women to stay in the marketplace and also to get into leadership positions. So here is where philanthropy, and particularly philanthropists who run large companies, I often tell philanthropists, high net worth individuals, um, we have some principles when it comes to philanthropy. One that's very important is, your money must do no harm, right? You have to make sure that your investments do no harm. But before you even start investing in outside initiatives, think about what you as a company can do to support the cause that you are interested in. So if you have a product that could be part of the solution, for example, if you're a pharmaceutical and you can offer, a product at a much more affordable cost. But if you are a company that employs a lot of people, are you walking the talk? Are you employing as many women? Are you putting the systems in place to support them? Are you ensuring their voices are heard? Are you making sure they get the same opportunity at leadership? So I think this is not an issue that's unique to our region. Certainly, this is a global issue. But what's exciting about being in the region right now is that we're starting to see huge improvements. Really exciting to see what's happening uh, right across the region, particularly in the Gulf, where we're seeing many more women go into leadership positions. And I think, we're going to start to see innovations coming from this region as well, not just, being on kind of the other end. So, and I think just coming back to that, Leila, if I can ask you the question, what do you think needs to be done? What are sort of, one or two top priorities that you think need to be done in this space?
I think you've covered it very well, Maysa. I think especially what you mentioned about theory of change and really we're getting to the root causes so we can have very targeted surgical interventions. I think cultural norms are a big thing. They really set back women, even when you get to the top in terms of education, and then you have children, and then the expectation is still that you handle that as well as you want to be top in your work, great, but make sure that you've handled all of that. And we don't always have the village to support. So how do we shape that? How does the government, the private sector, community all play a role to help with that? I think is key. Thank you so
And
much.
Leila, I'd just like to mention I was watching your TED Talk. I'm not sure if you've seen it, Mesa. I haven't. But Leila speaks exactly about this. She was a high achiever. She had credentials. She was top of the game. And her male colleague said to her, well, now you have a child. You should be at home.
Yeah. It wasn't just the male colleagues, but it was also society, the community, everybody around you, the expectation. And the hardest part, I think, as a young woman is when you face a little bit of challenges in your career. What you want is people motivating you to keep going. But what I got was, it's okay. Your husband can get the money, and you can just either have a part-time job and focus. But you've done enough. You've proven yourself. You're smart. You've proven yourself. You don't need to do that. And then you end up with only yourself to motivate yourself, just self-motivation, and that's really tough. So that's why I talk about cultural norms. It's really important.
And it's the hardest. It's the hardest to change.
Yeah.
Cultural norms
Yeah.
are the hardest.
And Mesa, I would like to ask you one final question, which is, what are you most hopeful for when it comes to the future of education in this region?
I'm actually really hopeful. Um, and the number one thing that gives me hope when it comes to education, actually, when it comes to the region, is young people themselves. I find them so incredibly inspiring. Um, their survey after survey shows that they remain incredibly hopeful despite all the challenges that they face. And they're only looking for opportunity. And, whether we're talking about climate change or we're talking about um, social entrepreneurship or we're talking about technology, it's all driven by them. And so, what we need to do to capitalize on that hope and to ensure that hope is nourished is to give them opportunities to build the ecosystem that supports that energy, that enthusiasm, that creativity, because in the end, it's going to make all the difference.
Absolutely. Leila, would you like to add anything to that?
Just to say that I see what gives me hope is that I see governments starting to do, coming together with the private sector, with NGOs to start to do exactly what Maysa is saying is much needed. If I look back, for example, at the GCC 10 years ago, education was seen as a way to make sure that the citizens were getting a good quality education to get a job, that they were able to attract talent. Today, when governments are talking about education and also the private sector coming together with the government and NGOs, it's about transformation. It's about innovation. It's about having a flagship university that's going to also invest in RDI, in research and development. So I see a lot of hope because education then becomes a source of economic development, and then that's very hopeful.
I think we're all hoping for the same things. And thank you to both of you for working towards achieving these goals and for creating opportunities for people in this region. And I want to thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.